We will now be moving on to our congressional candidates for Congressional District 3. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to an informative evening where we will hear your answers to questions from organizations that have come together to organize this candidate forum. This is a nonpartisan event. All candidates running for office have been invited. Each candidate on each panel will be asked a total of 4 questions with 2 minutes to answer each question. You will get a 30-second warning before your time is up, so please be mindful of the chat box. We ask that you please be courteous of all the participants and refrain from going over your time. We ask that you finish up your sentence at 2 minutes. After that, you will be muted. The questions derive from the organizations and the members represented in each organization. We have not provided the questions to any of the candidates in advance of the forum. We will begin with the candidates for the County Commission, and if there's enough time, we will take questions from the participants. We will first begin with a 20-second introduction from each of the candidates. If we can first begin with Mr. Asensio.
Hello, how are you? My name is Manuel Asensio, and I'm running for Congress against Kat Cameron in the Republican primary, and she's not here. She's invisible. She hides from me everywhere. You said 20 seconds? I don't see a clock. I can't tell when 20 seconds are up.
You have 5 seconds.
I have 5 more seconds. I am a Cuban-born immigrant to the United States. I started my journey to America on May 15th, 1961.
Mr. Asensio, if you could please wrap up.
Which was 2 weeks after the Bay of Pigs.
If we can now move on to Mr. Wells.
Hello, so happy to be here. I have a PhD in theoretical physics. I have a Green New Deal proposal and a methodology by which it might arrive in time to save your generation. And I have been working on projects, issues, and understanding of strategy for—
If you can please wrap up, Mr. Wells.
I appreciate your time and this forum.
Thank you. If we can now have Ms. Hawk.
My name is Danielle Hawk, and I'm running for Congress because we need to elect a representative who will put ordinary people at the forefront of their policies, not corporations, not political power, and not money. Thank you.
All righty, thank you to all our candidates. We will first begin with this question from National Women's Liberation and Indivisible Gainesville. During the last legislative session, the legislature passed a 15-week ban on access to safe and legal abortions with no exceptions for rape, incest, or trafficking victims. This ban will dramatically impact access to health care for women and most negatively impact poor individuals and their families. Are you in favor of this ban, and do you support an individual's right to abortion, and why? We will first begin with Mr. Wells.
Oh, I oppose abortions myself adamantly, but I do not think I have the province to impose my thoughts on anyone else. It should always be a woman's choice and consultation with her doctor and her own version of her faith. Now, when you mentioned the 15-week ban being passed, you're speaking of the state. This is a federal race. The federal idea right now is to codify Roe and hence reverse the obnoxious privacy limitation decision Dodd's, and you can't codify rights. Rights have to be immutable. And the attempt to codify them, of course, I support, but I'm fully aware that if we change the House, we change the Senate, then they can be codified. You make rights in the Constitution, those rights are still there. What has happened is the Supreme Court is using a super authority and dealing out for the last 50 years horrendous decisions. And it is time to look at Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution, which says judges' term shall be on good behavior. And it is time to clean out the court of those people who think that 16th century, 17th century, 13th century law scholars can be quoted after the American Revolution, where we threw all that crap out. It is time that we take back our democracy, eliminate bribery and campaigns, eliminate all corporate funding of campaigns. And if we do not do this, we fall immediately into fascism. The J6 bloody coup is precisely a warning of this.
Thank you. If we can now have Ms. Hawk.
With the reversal of Roe v. Wade, it is clear that Democrats have waited far too long to do something about codifying our right to choose. And now we have a crisis on our hands. We need to codify the access to abortion by passing the Women's Health Protection Act, and we need to eliminate the filibuster in the Senate to do it. So we need to get it done. And we also need to understand that reproductive freedom is more complex than just our access to safe and legal abortions. And that is why my platform for advancing these rights is more comprehensive than just that access. First, we need to address the maternal mortality rate among Black women. They are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth or postpartum than white women. It is clear that our healthcare system does not value Black women's lives as much as it values white women's, and that is absolutely unacceptable. Second, we need to provide access to reproductive healthcare in our public schools, including free menstrual products and reproductive biology education. 1 in 5 menstruating teens miss school in the United States because they don't have period protection. And the consequence of this is an education disparity. And third, we need to ensure that everyone who needs reproductive health care has access to it, including residents in our rural areas, incarcerated women, and LGBTQ folks who don't identify as women. Our country is in a state of emergency. We have a reactionary Supreme Court and GOP that has made it clear that they intend not just to strip away our rights to make healthcare decisions, but our right to marry who we love, our right to contraception, and our right to privacy. The stakes have never been higher, and as your next Congresswoman, I'm going to fight like hell to ensure that these extremists do not drag us back to the 1950s.
Thank you. If we can now have Mr. Asensio.
How much time have I got?
2 minutes.
Well, they got 4, so shouldn't I have 4 minutes? They're both
No, there's been
Democrats.
2 minutes.
Okay, should we start it now?
We'll start when you begin to speak.
Thank you. Roe versus Wade was discarded because it was an act of raw will and force by the federal government. If the federal government is going to use raw will and force, it should use it to stop the states from violating rights. There is nothing in the Constitution that speaks about abortion. This country was based on Judeo-Christian values. We have to live with that. We cannot set that aside. This country was based on the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is protected by the Bill of Rights, which doesn't allow cheating by leftists in court to create the illusion that women have the right to abort simply because they call it a health issue. That's not in the Bible. That's not in anything that was discussed when we created this country, and it's dead wrong. I'm very glad to see that you're so passionate. Well, you should keep those passions out of court, and you should keep them out of politics, because this is America. It's not a communist state. It's not a socialist state. It's not a Marxist state. It is America. And in America, we do not use the courts to impose your will on other people that don't see your way, especially in the federal courts. That's called raw will and force. And thank God that the courts had enough courage to, after 50 years of this horrible plague on the United States, of abortion being thought of legal by young women in a Judeo-Christian country that was created under the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. You have to destroy the Bill of Rights to come up with that scheme. And that was dead wrong.
If you could please wrap up, Mr. Asensio.
The liberals cannot abuse justice to make up stories about whose truth is truth. The truth is known here, and the Bill of Rights protects the truth.
Thank you to all our candidates. We will now be moving on to our second question. This question is from the Alaska County NAACP and Young Democratic Socialists of America. What are the most pressing environmental issues in your district? And what will you do to prepare your constituents to deal with challenges such as heat stress that are brought about by climate change? We will first begin with Ms. Hawk.
Thank you. So first of all, you may know that we are home to the largest concentration of freshwater springs in the world, and it's incredibly important to the people of this district and to our economic security here in North Central Florida that we protect those from corporations like Nestle, who are taking our water that we pay for and that we use in our own homes and turning that for a profit. We also need to protect our communities from phosphate mines and from the toll road that's coming through Tallahassee. And the answer about heat stress is that's especially important for our migrant workers. And we need to make sure that our OSHA regulations are including considerations for migrant workers who are working, especially in our rural counties in the 3rd Congressional District, and ensuring that they have adequate shade, water, and that they have adequate clothing to keep them cool.
Thank you. If we can now have Mr. Wells.
Thank you. The environmental problems are far more comprehensive than just District 3. Yes, we have many abuses in District 3 and many problems, but they will all be resolved only if we take care of the global problem. And yes, we should not be selling water to Nestle, but the way to stop that is part of the Green New Deal at the federal level, which will be to impose a tax on single-use bottles. And at the same time, to renew the infrastructure where we don't have 100-year-old pipes. We are far behind in our infrastructure because for 50 years, we've been investing money into things, and that money has been going to corporate profits rather than to the product advertised. And until we fix that, until we fix the corruption in our government, we can fix nothing. But once we fix the corruption in our government, then we can make a lot of things beautiful again. And the climate requires massive intervention right now. A very large carbon tax on carbon equivalents will put the dirtiest fuels out of business first if it is applied at the source. So then we will end up with fracking paying a very high price for the natural gas and oil they deliver because of the co-generated methane. The methane is actually 200 times as heat intensive as carbon dioxide, which is not adequately modeled in the UN model. So we're looking at vast consequences in a very short term. So preparing the government to the point where we can do that tax, which will fund a universal basic income at about $1,000 per adult, $500 per child per month, will compensate for the higher prices of energy and will favor those who have small footprints, which are usually the poor. So universal means every single person
If you could please wrap up, Mr.
in
Wells.
the country, whether they're here with papers or without. We'll speak more of that doubtless later.
Thank you. If we can now have Mr. Sancio.
There's no scientific evidence that the burning of fossil fuels increases the temperature or the risk of increased temperatures at a higher rate in the globe. This idea needs to be reviewed by scientists, not politicians. There's absolutely no consensus, and all the scientific evidence comes from political organizations that have been paid and bought by people that have an interest in alternative energy and have no interest in hydrocarbons. These kinds of creations, these kind of fallacies, these sort of myths that are being created in our society come from the corruption of our courts and our federal government. The creation of ideas that are outside of the realm of the Constitution to make individuals be able to change our economy entirely by creating, for instance, the value of Tesla is greater than all other automotive companies in the world. That kind of preposterous thing that comes into our markets can only be created by a fallacy that's so extraordinarily large, such as global warming. We've become like a religion, just like abortion has become an aversion. Thank goodness that the federal government decided that it did wrong and it stayed out of that. It should also stay out of global warming until it's resolved. It has to be resolved by the scientists. It cannot be resolved by politicians or lawyers litigating in court.
Thank you. We will now be moving on to our next question. This is the third question brought to you by Florida for All and Dream Defenders. In response to recent mass shootings like Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York, and exponential increases in youth gun violence in Florida, there has been a major push for common sense gun safety measures. Do you believe that there should be gun safety reforms in Florida? What do you believe are common sense gun safety measures? We will first begin with Mr. Asensio.
The legal and regulatory status of guns in America is a very serious problem because it was written into the Constitution to protect us from what's happening, which is the corruption of the federal government by interests from the left, because the right shouldn't be doing this, right? The left is the one that pulls the country into socialism, into Marxism, into communism, which are systems that are not allowed under the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, nor the Declaration of Independence that gives us natural rights that are God-given. It's just a very bad thing that we should be very careful in playing with. The regulation and the legal status of the idea that people have the right to arm themselves, to protect themselves from government, has to be respected by all who live here, just like our borders have to be respected to allow people in who are not communists, who are not socialists, who are not Marxists, and believe in the ideals that we have here, which begin with the belief that there is a God and that this nation was enlightened through the founding fathers in an idea that people have to be self-governed and can't be governed by politicians, lawyers, and judges.
Thank you. If we can now have Ms. Fox.
We should be absolutely ashamed of ourselves. Gun violence is a profoundly American problem. 110 Americans die of gun violence every single day, and this has now become a public health crisis. There are three things that we can do right now to curb this violence, and these are things that Americans overwhelmingly support. The first is closing background check loopholes, like the dating partner loophole, which requires anyone convicted of domestic violence to surrender their firearms to law enforcement. We should also require background checks for all firearm transfers. For instance, if I purchased a gun and gave it to someone as a gift, they'll do a background check on me, but they don't require one on the recipient of the gift. 22% of Americans report that they did not undergo a background check for their most recent gun purchase. The second thing we need to do is ban assault weapons, which are the weapon of choice for mass casualty events like Uvalde, Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, and Parkland. Third, and finally, we need to mandate safe storage and provide gun safety education, because children aren't just being killed in their classrooms, but in accidental gun deaths in their own home. And my opponent, Kat Kamik, is not offering any clear solutions on gun violence. She is actively voting against proven interventions like background.
She's not your opponent.
She voted against 3 times. She voted against safe storage programs. She voted against the Safer Communities Act. And most recently, she voted against an Amber Alert-like system, which will let people know that there is an active shooter situation near them. And this is not surprising because she was endorsed by the NRA twice, and she takes campaign contributions from lobbyists as well. I, on the other hand, was one of 3 Floridians to be endorsed by Everytown for gun safety, and I'm a proven advocate for gun safety legislation.
Thank you. And we please remind candidates to not unmute during the responses of other candidates, and please allow for the complete 2 minutes. If we can now have Mr. Wells.
Yes, the Supreme Court did not do as badly in this recent decision regarding New York gun laws. And New York can partially recover what they had, which was of course, Second Amendment compliant by the Supreme Court's ruling gun protocol. They now are looking at re-legislating with more specific requirements in mind to avoid the indefinite decisions that were the complaint of the Supreme Court. However, I take a more holistic view. I remark that in the wild, wild west, the first regulation a town created, Dodge City, Carson City, when they became a city and hired a sheriff, was that everyone entering the city checked their guns and knives at the sheriff's office, only to be reclaimed when they left. For until the turn of the 19th century, even Republican Texas governors would remark, there is no reason for anyone to carry a gun in a city, hidden or openly, except they be a criminal. Now, no one ever complained that these things were unconstitutional for a very long time. And now it is as if a compound sentence is too difficult to be read by the Supreme Court. A trained militia being necessary to the safety of a free state. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be damaged. So we have the world's largest army. We have a great big National Guard. We have a police force whose funding nationwide is as large as that of the third largest military in the world.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. If you could please wrap up.
And we need to think about whether there should be any gun rights. Reevaluate that compound sentence.
Thank you to our candidates. Our final question is from the Florida Immigrant Coalition. With increased anti-immigrant rhetoric and anti-immigrant legislation passed in the state of Florida, what policies will you champion to ensure Florida is a welcoming place for all people, including immigrants, undocumented and underdocumented people? We will first begin with Ms. Hawk.
The people coming to our country's border are human beings, and our response to them needs to be filled with dignity and compassion. It is not a crime, and there is nothing illegal about coming to our country's border. As a beacon of hope and opportunity to the world, we must absolutely act in the face of evil. These families who come to our border are asking for help, and we cannot turn the other way. Human suffering demands a response from us. Our documentation process needs to be both timely and dignified. And again, I want to remind you, it is not a crime, and there is nothing illegal about coming to our border. Our default should not be to treat these families like enemies by putting them in detention centers when they are not breaking the law. But if we want to talk about criminals, it is absolutely criminal to separate children from their families simply because they chose to seek a better life in the United States. It should be illegal in the United States to separate children and families at the border. And finally, DACA recipients need a pathway to citizenship. These are young adults who have built their lives here, who went to colleges, served in our military, and work at our businesses. We shouldn't be punishing them for decisions their parents made long ago. And I would be remiss if I did not highlight an alarming proposal from my primary opponent, Mr. Wells, that is based on the premise that there is something inherently wrong or criminal with families coming to our country's borders. On his website, Mr. Wells proposes, and I quote, "Ankle tagging is cost-effective and relatively humane." I think we can all agree that ankle tagging human beings that come to our border Something that we do to criminals and livestock is not only inhumane, but it lacks compassion.
Thank you. If we could now have Mr. Wells.
Well, Danielle, I, of course, agree with you. I am contrasting that with the present modality, too widely abused, of simply separating parents and children for profit and putting the children into homestead 3 or 4 years ago. That was the venue of choice, and charging private companies, charging us $750 a day to store those children, when for that $250,000 per year, I think any school system in the world would be happy to welcome that student and his whole family, and they could live comfortably. And that is what I actually intend to achieve. I intend to achieve that using existing laws largely, because while everybody talks law and order as a reason for abusing immigrants, the actual laws and treaties to which we are subject, which are the supreme law of the land, say that anyone seeking asylum or claiming to be a refugee has the right to be a privileged guest in this country until their case is adjudicated. And that is not happening. And I wrote widely of this 4 years ago. It has obviously gone nowhere, but everyone, every family should be kept together. The only reason you would ever ankle cuff anyone is to assure return to trial. And I think everyone will admit that is a better solution than ever the incarceration for profit. We have a for-profit prison system and the highest incarceration rate in the world, the highest profit rate from the slaves, the slavery, the modern highly profitable slavery that our Border Patrol implements. So, thank you.
Thank you. We can now have Mr. Sencio.
I'd like a moment for administration. All of my questions have been answered in far less than 2 minutes, and I've only gotten 2 minutes for every question, and they've gotten over 6 minutes in general sometimes. That's one administrative question. I'd like to have my time that I set aside for this question, which is perhaps the most important the nation is facing.
We have been holding every candidate to the 2-minute timer, as you can see from the timestamps provided by our timekeeper.
I have here the time and I see it differently, but forgive me if I'm wrong. I'll take your, I recorded them all. And I'd also like to make sure that the record is clear that Daniel should know who she's running against if she wants to participate in the democratic process.
Thank you. If you could please refer to the question, Mr. Sanchez, if you could refer to the question.
Oh, look. She mentioned Kat Kammen's name. She's not here. I'm running against Kat Kammen, not her. He's running against Tom Wales. She's not running against Kat Kammen. She's far from it. Okay. I'm sorry for taking that time for an administration, but may I have extra time since I answered my question? You have 2 minutes
to answer.
But I saved time before.
This is not how that works. We are doing 2 minutes per question.
Okay. First of all, Danielle, if you want to live in a country without borders, go ahead and move there. Countries need borders to keep people out that they don't want in. People come here for better lives. I came here for better lives. They make that happen through their own personal wealth and their own personal efforts. If you want to be a communist, if you want to be a socialist, if you want to be a Marxist, you must go to another country. America is built on private privilege and private property. And that has to be protected, including from inflation that is feeding the idea that you can do these things and get away with them. You can't. And inflation has to stop. And so does the idea that borders don't exist. The problem with ideas that borders don't exist is that they leak into the federal court system. And then the federal courts protect illegal immigrants and it becomes a mess. and the whole world knows about it, especially Latin America, and they come in because they know that people like you who don't respect the law, have no interest in private property, who don't care about the fact that you need police to protect property in order to be safe and secure. If you want to have a place where you don't feel safe and secure, where people come in that don't believe that there is a constitution, don't believe that there is a Declaration of Independence that gives you natural rights to private property, and that don't believe that there is a Bill of Rights to protect yourself from government taking away that private property, including not guarding the borders to protect your property and your life and your government. Because what you're doing as a leftist is bringing people into the country who believe that America is racist. It's not racist. Who believe that America is moving to the left, and it's not moving to the left, and it shouldn't move to
Thank
the
you,
left.
Mr. Asensio. If you could please wrap up.
This idea that courts can ignore the law.
All right, thank you to our candidates.
Okay, so we do have an audience question. Hold on one second. So to our candidates, would you consider vetting immigrants based on their political beliefs, Marxist, atheist, or otherwise, to allow entry into the United States as a violation of our country's First Amendment rights? And we're going to start with Mr. Wells for this.
Thank you. Of course not. We have atheists and Marxists in the country already. We have socialists and conservatives and all stripes of thought. What becomes a gap is when you have violent people that you're admitting who come with the idea of violent overthrow. I would basically say that so long as you believe in democracy as a way of deciding the form of government, that you have met my test. And that is a test that our Supreme Court does not pass. So it's not being born here that proves that you're a citizen and that you're a value and that you can be a value. We have people who think that they are so privileged that they want to reinstall white privilege and build a country where, as Mussolini described, we have the merger of corporate and state power. And when the Supreme Court in '76 began the process of making money equal to political speech, they inevitably created a merger of state and political power, corporate power, which favors the corporations, because the corporations now write the laws and they are passed unread by a Congress which is 95% of both parties, with one winning their election, winning their seat with corporate money. Now, until you fix that, codifying Roe, codifying gun rights, codifying anything is meaningless. In fact, even amendments are meaningless unless we have a government of, by, and for the people, which means that every person who votes, every citizen being a voter, would have the right to get a voter voucher of $200, and there will be no other funding of elections except convincing each individual in your district or across the country that you're worthy of their investment, and everybody in the country gets the same input into the election and who represents them, and then our children
Thank you, Mr. Wells.
will
If you could
be
please wrap up.
represented. And if we don't do that, we never will address the climate crisis, which does exist. I am a scientist. Thank you, Emmanuel. I can read the papers. This has been studied first by Exxon, and they came to the conclusion that they couldn't make profit off it. That's the only reason they suppressed that research.
So
May I-
next up is Ms. Hawk.
Thank you. So the question is whether or not I would consider vetting immigrants as a violation of our country's First Amendment rights and vetting them based on their political beliefs. So first of all, I want to make it very clear that I do not support vetting immigrants based on political or even religious beliefs. That's completely inappropriate. And I believe that that goes against our founding ideals as a country. I believe that that goes against the reason why this country is the great country that it is. It's because we allow people to choose. We allow people to have freedom of thought. We allow people to have freedom of religion. And so I find that vetting immigrants based on any of their political or even their religious beliefs would be, it would be betraying our founding ideals as a country.
Right, and Mr. Asensio.
People that think like Danielle are the problem. She doesn't understand that this country is a republic, a democrat, and a constitutional institution. And the people that come here should be aware of that. There are so many leftist, communist, socialists in America today that think that they're within their ability to do and speak and impose their will on all people, that they've created the illusion that people have to, I have witnessed, I've seen in the caravan how leftists teach these people that are coming in here illegal that they need to come in order to make America not, in order to change America, in order to change its founding principles. That's not right. That's wrong. You can't ask someone whether they are a communist, a socialist, or a Marxist. They are not going to tell you the truth. What we have to do is be firm about who we are to make sure that people that come here have our same values. I don't have the same values that Tom has. I don't have the same values that Danielle has, but you want to impose your values on me. I came here because no one should impose their values on anyone. This is a free society, not a society created by you, Danielle, or by you, Tom, and not a society created by opening your borders for people that don't know what America is. America is the land of freedom, not because Danielle came out of the blue and wants to create what is virtuous, what is not virtuous. You won't say what is sinful, what is not sinful. Morality is not yours to govern. And using borders to change the morality and the value system and the principles, especially the first principle being that we are God made
Thank
and
you,
that we
Mr.
have
Asensio. If you
natural
could please wrap
rights.
up.
It's
We also do ask for
I
our
will
candidates
wrap
to
up.
refrain from personal attacks.